It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Planet Holyrood, the podcast for all things Scottish politics. My name's Chris McCall. I'm the Deputy Political Editor here at the Daily Record, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues to talk about another day of dramatic developments in the general election campaign. Douglas Ross, the full-time Scottish Conservatives leader, sometime MP and part-time SFA match official, has announced he will be quitting one of his three jobs. Following a backlash after he announced his last-minute decision to stand in the election on July 4th, Ross said today he will be standing down as Scottish Conservatives leader next month. He'll also quit Holyrood if he is successful in his bid to return to Westminster. Now, joining me to discuss this latest dramatic development is Paul Hutcheon, the Record's political editor, and we're also joined today by Molly Finlay, one of the Record's affiliate writers. Now, Paul, I'll come to you first. Why on earth has Douglas Ross decided to quit in the middle of an election campaign?
Well, frankly, his heart is not in leading the Scottish Conservatives anymore. He's always been a guy who wanted to be at Westminster and not Holyrood. And there's an arrogance to Douglas Ross as well. Last week, he announced a pretty major U-turn. He promised that he wasn't going to be standing for the House of Commons. He then decided he was going to stand for the House of Commons, effectively barging past a seriously ill colleague, and he felt he could wing it and everything would be okay with his colleagues. Now, that clearly has not been the case. I've spoken to a number of senior Scottish Tory figures this morning. They were furious with last week and Douglas Ross's U-turn. They think that it shows a lack of commitment to Holyrood. It looks bad with the voters, given that he's tried to hold down two separate parliamentarian jobs in addition to the linesman gig. And they feel like it just makes a mockery of the Conservative Party, which, let's face it, it's had a pretty dismal campaign so far. And I think this is probably the last thing that they need. So I spoke to someone this morning who felt like it was always Douglas Ross's plan to resign after July 4th, but his plan has been somewhat hastened by the fierce backlash against what he announced last week.
Yeah. Molly, I'll come to you now. Were you surprised by the timing of this announcement? As Paul alluded to there, it's hardly ideal for a party to lose its leader when they're already struggling so badly in this campaign.
It's not ideal, but I think also after the whole expenses scandal came out over the weekend that he's now got to justify, it's probably not surprising that Ross has resigned after his colleagues have had almost a week now to consider whether they're happy with him doing these two jobs and whether they think he's capable. It's terrible timing in a wider disastrous campaign for the Tories in the UK. I think Rishi Sunak thought that he could lie low over the weekend, let things blow over, and he's come back to an awful Monday morning at work with the Scottish wing of his party falling apart and his party chairman having had an awful interview over the weekend about himself being parachuted into a safe seat. It's not looking good.
Absolutely.
Just to pick up on Molly's point there, Chris, the expenses issue that was flagged up in our sister paper, the Sunday Mail, yesterday, which has pointed out that he seemed to have claimed parliamentary expenses which coincided with his work as a linesman. Now, that in itself raises pretty serious questions, but the fact that if you read the story, there was clearly a Scottish Tory insider leaking that in order to damage him. I think Douglas Ross would have looked to that and think, well, that's maybe a pretty good symbol of how angry colleagues are with me, and that they're willing to do that in the middle of an election campaign. And that probably contributed to his feeling that maybe it's time to draw matters to a close. I think he was always going to be resigning after July 4th, but his position was increasingly untenable. And I think when you look at Rishi Sunak's hapless start to the campaign, where he left early at the Normandy event and had that separate event at the Titanic Centre, when Douglas Ross is actually making the Prime Minister look good through his own performance, then it's alarm bells should be ringing for the Scottish Conservatives. And at the beginning of the campaign, we all thought that the Scottish Tories might buck the national trend, that they might hold on to their constituencies, add a couple more in the northeast. But I have to say, given events of the last week, both with Douglas Ross's terrible handling of the situation and Reform also going up in the polls, I think it's far from clear that the Scottish Conservatives are going to have a good night.
On that point, Paul, on the wider election campaign, a few weeks ago, people were talking, maybe the Tories will hold all of their MPs in Scotland, and they might even claim a few scalps from the SNP. But obviously today, and Douglas Ross's announcement, that completely upsets the apple cart for the party. Who do you think will be the main beneficiary of Douglas Ross's decision in the short term in this election campaign? I was speaking to Anas Sauer earlier, and I asked him, will this benefit Labour? Are you now in play in maybe Northern Scotland in a way that you weren't before? And he kind of fudged it and said that he was always confident that Labour could win across Scotland. But do you think it'll be Labour or the SNP that will be cheering the loudest by developments earlier this morning?
Well, I think that certainly the Sunak troubles, Labour are the main beneficiary and also Reform. But in terms of the Scottish Conservatives, given that the Scottish Tories are in a number of two-way matchups against the SNP, I think it would be the Scottish National Party that stands to be the main beneficiary of any Scottish Tory slide in the polls. There's one seat outside Glasgow which Labour's Blair McDougall is going for. I think he would benefit from a Scottish Tory dip in that area, but I think that John Swinney will be rubbing his hands with glee over the last few days. That he put his boot into Douglas Ross pretty heavily at the weekend over the expenses questions. He knows that if the Tories fall at a faster rate than the SNP in those key Aberdeenshire seats, then he'll probably hold on. So I think the SNP are happy today.
Okay. Over to you, Molly. I'm going to ask, you mentioned Rishi Sunak earlier. How do you think he's been viewing events in Scotland today? Will he be sitting there thinking, I've got enough problems and, I've only just been added to, really can't catch a break?
Yeah, I think that he's probably not been thinking too much about Scotland at the moment with the disaster that is the UK campaign, and he's probably now sitting thinking to himself this Monday morning, for God's sake, can I not just leave you alone for 1 minute? Can I take my attention off you for a second? And obviously the moment he's had a quiet weekend and tried to shy away from the media, things have gone all wrong in Scotland, and Douglas Ross has well and truly brought the headlines back to the Conservatives.
Okay. Paul, where do the Scottish Conservatives go from here? Because next week we have the publications of the Scottish Party manifestos. So there'll be the UK manifestos out this week. I believe we'll see the Labour manifesto launched on Thursday. But next week we could see the sight of Douglas Ross standing alongside Rishi Sunak, promoting a manifesto for a party that he's decided he can no longer lead. I mean, what kind of message does that send to voters?
Well, before the manifesto launch, I think we've got a Scottish Tory event tomorrow in Edinburgh, which I'll definitely be going along to. I think that the Daily Record has got a number of questions for Douglas Ross, given events of the last few days. But it really does make a mockery of any Scottish Tory manifesto launch. When your political party has become a figure of fun, when the political party is being mocked and your leaders don't have any credibility, then I think you've got a serious problem. And that's the position that Rishi Sunak and Douglas Ross now find themselves in. The obvious question to Douglas Ross whenever he launches this manifesto is, well, if you care so much about this, why are you going to be resigning as leader? Isn't this for your successor? And he doesn't really have a good answer to that one. And I also think it's very telling as well. I mean, I said at the beginning that Douglas Ross's heart has always been at Westminster. He's a House of Commons man. He's not a Holyrood guy. I think he sees Westminster as the real Parliament. But, the Tories are going to go into opposition after this general election. He's choosing to be a backbencher at Westminster rather than leader of his party, hoping to be maybe the next First Minister. Now, I know that that's a massive long shot, but that was always his aim. So he's choosing the obscurity of the Tory backbenches, where the Conservatives might have 100, 120 MPs over being at Holyrood. To me, that speaks volumes of the Conservative Party's commitment to the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there are more than a few MSPs in the Scottish Conservatives that will be striking Douglas Ross off their Christmas card list, not just for events of today, but how things have panned out more generally for the party.
I should say on that, Chris, that if you look at, I've got a Twitter list of Tory MSPs, and they were very slow to offer some kind words to Douglas Ross this morning. I mean, 3 hours after the resignation, there still wasn't anything on Twitter about any of his MSPs. Pam Gosal eventually coughed up something, and then I think Douglas Lumsden in the Northeast as well, but they weren't exactly rushing to his defence, because I think they've got contempt for him. They think that he has damaged their party, damaged their chances at a key moment in the election. And I think that they want to see the back of this guy.
Yeah.
And also, just to say, neither has his deputy, Megan Gallagher, who's potentially the next heir apparent. If they're looking for a new leader, she's been pretty quiet on Twitter, which I think is also fairly telling of how his colleagues feel about him over the last week or so.
Absolutely. And I should say to listeners, if you're interested in who may be in the running to become the next Scottish Conservative leader, our colleague Andrew Quinn has written a handy explainer of 5 people who may well be considering a campaign bid. You mentioned Megan Gallagher there, Molly, who will definitely be one of the names up there. Russell Finlay, a Glasgow List MSP, he's likely to be in the running as well, but do check out Andrew's piece if you get the chance. Molly, sticking with you, one of the things that Douglas Ross has faced a lot of criticism for, his 3 jobs, as his political opponents have constantly reminded him, leaving aside his weekend activities as a linesman at Scottish professional football games. He's faced a lot of flack for being an MP and an MSP, and obviously he did say, well, he indicated he was going to, leave behind Westminster and focus on Holyrood. Then you turned on that pretty spectacularly last week. But the more broader point, do you feel that MSPs should, stick to one parliament and, the same in Westminster? Do you feel the old double jobbing needs to come to an end? And if you're going to be in Holyrood, you should just stick to the job at Holyrood?
I do think so, in the same way that I don't think MPs or MSPs should have second jobs as a doctor or a solicitor if they're serving in a parliament. I think if you want to be in public office and serve your constituency, then that should be where 100% of your attention is given to. And I know that Douglas Ross donates his MSP salary to charity, and that's all very well, but if you have 3, not just 2 jobs, where is your attention going, and how are you adequately paying attention to your constituents in both Westminster and Holyrood? I don't think it's appropriate, and it's not something I would expect from a leader, especially.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that. And see, if you look at his linesman duties, Douglas always likes to say, this is a separate weekend thing. It doesn't interfere with the politics, but it has caused him nothing but grief over the years. I mean, you had the story a few years ago about his non-declaration of, I think, dozens of the matches, which came with a fee. That caused him huge political bother. Now he had the story at the weekend about apparently claiming parliamentary expenses while he's on linesman duty, again causing him political difficulties. I just think that he's never been a guy that could kind of see the wood for the trees on this. Yeah, there's a sort of stubbornness to him where people are saying, look, Douglas, just give up the linesman stuff, have 1 job rather than 3, and then you'll be in a much better place. But he's never taken good advice. He just does his own thing. And I think that has come back to haunt him.
On the subject of football, there's the start of the Euros, the European Championships on Friday, when many people's attentions will be focused on Scotland and the opening game against Germany. Is the Euros coming at a good time for the Tories? You know, that maybe they'll finally be off the front pages for a few days?
I never thought of it like that, but when you put it like that, then perhaps. I mean, I think that Rishi Sunak might have been slightly relieved this morning that it was Douglas Ross in the headlines and not himself. Maybe Douglas was giving him a bit of breathing room. I'm not sure if the Euros is going to have much impact on this campaign at all. I had a sort of slight feeling that if England did well, then Rishi Sunak might use the patriotic fervour that comes with that to maybe, wrap himself in the flag and appeal to certain types of voters. But I think they're separate. I honestly think that the Conservatives are toast. They just cannot get any traction in this campaign. It looks like they're in quicksand, and they're probably headed for the worst result in their history. And
fans of political history will probably know that Harold Wilson had hoped that his flagging Labour government could have been saved by an England World Cup win in the summer of 1970, only for England to crash out in spectacular circumstances against West Germany. So I feel if Rishi Sunak's hoping for an England victory, he might see history repeating itself on that front. But as you say, Paul, I think football will be irrelevant. Really, there really seems to be one result coming down the line. Just to kind of wrap things up, Molly, Scottish Conservatives, is this the nadir? Have they reached the lowest point, or do you feel maybe there's some further blunders and embarrassments coming out the closet for them that we can still look forward to?
I think this election campaign's already shown that when you think that the Tories are at rock bottom, there's always a little bit further that they might go. And actually, just to expand on that point on the Euros, although it might not affect the way people vote, whether patriotism is going to make them feel like they want to vote for somebody in particular, it's absolutely no mistake that Sunak's called this election when he did. It's during the Scottish school holidays. A lot of the campaign's going to be overshadowed by Euros coverage, also by Glastonbury coverage, Glastonbury attendance, which is obviously huge for younger voters who are obviously the people who are going to turn out to vote against the Conservatives. I absolutely don't think it's a mistake that this election's happening now, but whether a football result will sway somebody's actual vote at the poll, I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
I don't think they've hit rock bottom. When Sunak launched his campaign in the rain, I thought, what is that about? And then he did the event at the Titanic Centre, and I thought, you can't get any lower than that. And then you have the Normandy no-show, and now we're going to get a whole series of polls with Reform breathing down their neck. I think that their lowest point will be on July the 4th.
And let's not forget, he's got a 1-to-1 on Panorama tonight, so who knows what one-liner he might give and give the papers tomorrow morning.
Indeed.
The Conservative Party always full of surprises, you could say. And I think on that note, we'll draw proceedings to a close. So thanks very much to my two panellists, Paul Hutcheon and Molly Finlay, for joining me today. And a reminder that Planet Holyrood will be producing election specials on every weekday, Monday to Friday, between now and July 4th. And do check back previous episodes when we've had a few high-profile guests who've joined us here at Record HQ. But for now, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.